Welcome to Craftlit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 551, Nothing Special. This episode of Craftlit is brought to you by you. Thank you. Well, hello. How are you? I am well. I am here, and oh my gosh, does it feel good to be back? Because, oh, wow. The last few weeks at work were insane. We've had our team of trainers reduced from 5 down to functionally 2. And had to set up for a whole new 4 rounds of trainees because there still seems to be a virus. So it was a lot of work. A lot had changed since August, which is great because it means we've learned a lot from the data that's coming in. A lot of very, very good vaccine information coming in too, especially for the 2 mRNA vaccines that we've got, the Moderna and the Pfizer, and the J&J. The best news yet, and this came from Dr. Daniel Griffin on the This Week in Virology weekly update for, I don't remember the episode number, but it would have posted last Saturday or Sunday, so 27th, maybe it was the 27th of March, 2021. The news that he updated everyone on is that for people who have had long COVID, long haulers, people who are still experiencing really bad symptoms, lingering symptoms, months, plural, after recovering from COVID, when they are no longer infectious and no longer actively feeling the worst effects of the virus, there seems to be data coming in that indicates that after the second dose of the 2-dose vaccines, that would be the Moderna and the Pfizer right now, after the second dose, there are some symptoms that are being relieved, which is awesome because they still don't seem to know what's going on. The other interesting thing that he hasn't talked about, except tangentially, is that all of the kind of household wisdom about what to do, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, melatonin, and I read somewhere about echinacea. Have only seen that in one place though. They're all low-level blood thinners. And we know that this virus kind of makes your blood gooey. So the blood thinner thing turns out to be important, especially in people who are hospitalized. Dr. Griffin released a paper. He was part of a team of people who released a paper on how to use blood thinners for people who are brought to the hospital and what to do and what the timing should be. And that is available on PubMed, and I will get a link for you to that journal article if you are interested in taking a look. But aside from, the all-consuming virus that I was about to say that is my life, but it's not. It's just that my life surrounds it right now. I have some fun stuff for you. First up is Tara. She has some goodies to share with everybody, and I've provided links to several of them in the show notes. So Justin's posted those for you. It's always good to hear from Tara. So there's that. And we're going to play that for you right now. Here we go.
Hello, Heather. Tara Worcester here. I'm calling in to chime in with some thoughts and confirmations on some things that you mentioned. Yes, you did see on Bernadette's channel 18th Century Ladies Fashion. It was a presentation done by the American Duchess Gals, which is Abbey Cox and Nicole Rudolph. They also have a book, 18th Century Fashion. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. Also, if you have any time to do anything and want to be deeply entertained either with knowledge or comedy, check out Nicole Rudolph for Tailoring Knowledge and Abbey Cox, COX, for fashion knowledge of 18th century fashions. Nicole is currently doing a 1940s suit from the undergarments out, And Abby Cox does comedically genius pieces on pretty much anything. Her latest piece that I keep watching and laughing my absolute bosom off is about boobs. Yep, I said it, boobs. It's hilarious. It's like 500 years of boobs because someone got sassy in her comments. She was like, oh, well, I've got some words for you, boobs. It's delightful. And the closest thing I know to a gig is like a sulky, but that's a racing. That's designed specifically for single horse racing. How it's made did pieces on both carriages and sulkies. I will find those and link you to them. And for some background earworms, for people who are doing anything and need some music, Guy Lombardo and the Royal Canadians, their song Little Coquette. It is delightful. It is sang by Carmen Lombardo, and he has a beautiful voice. I hope you're having a great day, Heather. Mine has literally just started, and I'm waiting for a call from Home Depot, so I hope you have a great day. I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Tara is so right about anything Abby Cox posts being worth your time. I find her both hilarious and informative, and in fact, have posted not the boobs episode, I don't think, but I did post probably the most important point of view I have heard on women's bodies, shapes, and how we see women's bodies. Not like, oh, Marilyn Monroe was round and soft and now everybody's supposed to be skinny. Not that kind of body shape thing. It's much more interesting and deep and I think relevant than that. I think the episode title is What I Learned from Wearing 18th Century Clothes for 5 Years. And what she has to say is fascinating. So fascinating that I showed a good chunk of the video to Andrew and Aaron, two people who really could not care less about women's fashion from the 18th century. I think that's inaccurate. I think that is a totally accurate statement. I do not think they could care any less about that stuff. And they were blown away and fascinated, and it really had an impact. She is very, very fun and very, very smart. So that link is there for you as well. We also got a voicemail from Jennifer. Thursday Night Jennifer. I am playing it for you now. Well, actually, Justin is playing it for you now. So here you go.
Hey, Heather. Jennifer Gordon. I've been thinking about last week's episode, and it occurred to me that Catherine and Isabella keep referring to the men. And, I'm now one of our more mature readers. I have a granddaughter about the age of Catherine and Isabella, and it occurred to me that the men that they are so eager and chasing are really frat boys. And, if we think of them in terms of being frat boys, I mean, of course they're idiots. They're of an age to be idiots. I think if we think of them in those terms, I think it may enlighten us a little bit about why they act the way they do. They're that age. The other thing that has been preying on my mind is I would love to donate to the wonderful Maya, but PayPal, when I tried to do that, insisted that I open an account, which I would much rather not do. Is there some other way that we could do this? Perhaps a tip jar? So there you go. Looking forward to seeing you back. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, on the frat boys. And you're going to see more of that this week. Uh-huh. And yes, on Maya. The tip jars usually do go through, well, in my world, tip jars have usually gone through PayPal as well. But I think there's a way to fix the settings so that you can use just any old debit card or credit card. And I have alerted Maya to it and hope that we will have a solution for you because, yes, you should be able to send some support to Maya for all of the goodness that she brings us all the time without having to open a PayPal account. I totally get that. So we're working on it. But yes. And so aside from that, let's see. crafty stuff, the things that I've been doing to keep myself from losing my mind, I have been able to handle tearing paper. I think that's actually pretty accurate. Tearing paper and slapping gesso onto things. Yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's about what I have been able to handle lately. So I went down a YouTube rabbit hole of junk journals and lap books and bookbinding. It started with bookbinding because in cleaning out the basement, I found some books that I had started trying to repair. Oh, probably not quite a decade ago. And it made me think, oh, back when I was trying to do this by myself so very long ago, there wasn't much of a YouTube infrastructure for tutorials and things like that. I'll bet there's information out there now. And there is. Highly recommended Nick the Booksmith, N-I-K. She is marvelous and informative, and I love her. Mike Deakin, Deakin. He is also lovely and wonderful, and they are so good at sharing all the things that they know and learn. And then that led to the Paper Outpost videos, which led to Karen Campbell videos, which it just became a whole lot of, I think I can probably manage to tear up paper and glue it onto other paper. And that's pretty much the amount of brain I have left after working. Because I sit for so long, I have now set up the ironing board kind of in the very back of the room where the TV is. So it's behind everybody so I don't annoy anybody else. And I have set up a little space on the ironing board where I can just glue things onto paper while we've got the TV on at night. Yeah. I have been bear of very little brain whenever I haven't been actually at the computer working. So it's been interesting though. I have learned a lot. I don't know what I've learned about, but I have learned a lot. And for me, learning is just it's my jam. So I don't have anything particularly useful for you this week again in the crafting arena, except that depending on which direction you tear paper, it can look very different. And paper does seem to have a grain. There we go. That's my giant words of wisdom for you this week. You're welcome for that. I know that probably just changed your life. Oh. All right. So, Northanger Abbey. Dude. Jennifer's frat boy. Dude. We have more talk of fashion. I know you're shocked. More talk of fashion and also more details about dancing. And we have a little bit on card game. And we have a little more character revelation going on in this week's chapters. But in a large part, this is one of the chapter sets, chapters 10 and 11, where some pieces are being moved into position on a chessboard. But along with that, we're starting to see where actual conflicts may grow from. And we are starting to have character revealed to us. Not character capital C, but character lowercase c. What kind of character does this person have? Are they a good person? Are they a person of dubious character? Are they worth Catherine's time and effort? These are the kinds of things that we start to see more details of in this week's chapters. Some terminology. I don't remember actually us ever having come across, not even in North and South, a particular term. Tambored muslin, Tambored. So we've talked about muslin. I know we've talked about muslin in the past. There's the kind of heavy duty muslin that's a little nubby and a little rough. And that's the stuff that we used to make flats out of when I was in high school and we were doing theater. And then you'd size it by painting it white with latex paint, and that would stretch it onto the fabric frame and make it tight. Kind of a tambored set piece, actually. Because a tambour is a frame. It's a tambourine frame. So the way a tambourine, the way we think about it now in modern time, is a musical instrument with a little cymbally things built into the sides, but it's basically a drum skin stretched over a round frame. Tambored muslin is the same idea. It is the muslin has been stretched tight over a round frame, and then it has been embroidered, hand stitched. So you can imagine if you have a very fine piece of muslin, not the heavy duty stuff that we made sets out of, but the very fine, like gossamer weight muslin stretched out with some very fine needlework on it, you can get some pretty exquisite looking fabrics out of that. So when you hear a tambored muslin, it's got really lovely hand done needlework in a pattern all over it. There's a jacquenet. It's a little heavier than the lightweight little jackets that they wore. What they remind me of is a little bit like a bolero jacket. It's very similar to the other outerwear we talked about, that it's on pure waist and it's cut off at that point. There's nothing below that. So it's really just covering like bust, shoulders, and then sleeves. And yeah, it reminds me of a shrug or a fitted shrug with a collar or a very short bolero jacket kind of thing. They're very cute. So that's our fashionista talk that we have to, deal with, which indicates who we will see at the beginning of chapter 10. Once again, I am bringing up the movie Gaslight. If you haven't seen the original black and white Gaslight, I highly, highly recommend it, because you will see in this chapter again Thorpe, in a lightweight kind of way, gaslighting Catherine, basically because she is so good and she takes things so matter-of-factly, straightforwardly, pretty much literally, but she's just so lacking in any guile, and she so desperately does not want to offend anyone or hurt anyone, which comes into play in a fairly massive way in today's chapters. It's very easy for him to play her like a cheap violin. And you'll see some of his fancy footwork in chapter 10. Oh, actually, chapters 10 and 11 both today. And it is his, as Jennifer alluded to, kind of frat boy behavior, which is on proud display in today's chapters as well. Fortnight, we've come across this before. Fortnight is short for 14 nights, which is 2 weeks. And at one point, you're going to hear a reference to dancing at the top of the set or dancing at the bottom of the set. This is in those line dances where you have the men and the women in two separate lines facing each other, and someone at the top of those two lines, the woman and the man, come together. I think we saw some of this in Bridgerton. They come together and they do some kind of intricate dance going down to the bottom of the lines, where they then take their position, and the couple back at the top, they start their promenade, their dancey thing, going down the lines. Sometimes it's more than two people at a time, depends on how intricate it is, but that's the top of the set or the bottom of the set. And then you'll hear a mention of dancing all the way home in her chair. This was one of the sedan chairs. This is being carried back to your residence from the pump room or whichever venue you were dancing at, in one of the chairs that's being carried by two guys. So that's the chair she's dancing in. Augured, Augured. Sometimes this is used as a phrase that's related to prophecy, like you pre-see or you project out something that is going to happen. Beginning of chapter 11, you're going to hear mud called dirt. So when it's raining out, we might say, oh, I don't want to go out. I don't want to get my shoes muddy. I don't want to get mud all over everything. They would say dirty in this chapter. It's the same thing. For our listeners in the UK or listeners who know their UK geography, if you know the distance between Bath and Bristol, it's about 12 miles, I think, you will understand how Catherine is being played in chapter 11. For those of you who don't know, just understand that as soon as they start talking cities and towns, there is no possible way that the journey could be made in the time that they are discussing. That's all you need to know. It gets kind of intricate as far as timings go. Jane Austen was really paying attention. All you need to know is that it's not possible. You will hear a reference to a phaeton with bright chestnuts. Phaeton was the four-wheeled open carriage. Very nice. Bright chestnuts would be references to the horses. Bright, sparkling, shiny, clean, healthy, young, chestnut-colored horses. And there is a reference to commerce, a pool of commerce. Commerce was a card game, and it was a lightweight kind of luck of the draw betting game, usually fairly mild, low stakes, more fun than anything else. When I was reading about it, it kind of sounded like a cross between what we used to call idiot poker. Everybody'd be dealt a single card, and everybody would put the card on their forehead without looking at it. So you could only make bets based upon the cards on other people's foreheads. So if everybody else had high-ish cards, you would probably pass or bet very low. If everybody else has low cards, you may choose to bet higher because there's a better chance that your card is higher than everybody else's. That kind of game, it's a little bit like that. But the grammar of discussing the game made it kind of confusing. So commerce is the name of the game. The pool is like the betting pool. It's actually the pool of cards in the middle, but that's also where you place your bets. So that's all they're talking about. You will hear the term croaking, like a frog would croak. Croaking is used here as a croaking fellow. A croaking fellow is a gloomy fellow. He's dour. He's not quite the happy camper that he often is. So a croaking fellow is a dismal or gloomy guy. Cattle. Cattle turned out to be a euphemism for women. I know it's charming, right? And you have probably figured out who is going to say this. There was some debate, actually, amongst the editors of the copies of Northanger that I've got. Some think that Jane Austen was largely unaware of the many different ways that the word cattle is used in regards to women, and that particular editor thought it was just a reference to people in general. However, the other editor noted that it was a well-known slang slur to call women of dubious profession sad cattle. I know it's charming. So when you hear the person who you are correct in assuming uses this slang term, just cattle, not sad cattle, but cattle, he is referring to female people or person in this case. I know he's such a peach. And Blaze Castle, Blaize. Blaze Castle, you can still go visit. It is not a Gothic era castle. It is a folly. It is a faux Gothic castle that was built in 1766. And it's just kind of big, empty building. It was built at a time, if you saw the Tom Stoppard play Arcadia, it was built at a time when people were knocking themselves out, just having a great old time building fake old stuff on their property. We've talked about this before. We've come across these kinds of things before. Maybe you had a rolling field on your property, and at one point where it rolled down, maybe there's a little copse of trees. And so you would build an ancient, I'm using air quotes, hermit's cottage or stone shack that was kind of tumble down. That would be a lovely artistic commentary that you would place on the landscape that would be, something interesting to catch the eye in the vast expanse of green rolling out from your home, should you be so lucky as to have grand acreage and things like that you could play with that way. So Blaze Castle was a folly. It was not a real castle. Important to know. There was one other thing. Somebody wrote to me about netting, Netting, instead of knitting, and I can no longer find the email. And if you can send it again, I will share it next week. It came in right at the beginning of my 4 weeks of nightmare at work. So I saw it come in and thought I flagged it and saved it, and now I can't find it. So if you could resend it, that would be fantastic because I very much want to read about that. All right, here we go. Chapters 10 and 11 of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, read for us by the lovely Maya Daguerre. Here we go.
Chapter 10. The Allens, Thorpes and Morlands all met in the evening at the theatre, and as Catherine and Isabella sat together, there was then an opportunity for the latter to utter some few of the many thousand things which had been collecting within her for communication in the immeasurable length of time which had divided them. "Oh, heavens, my beloved Catherine, have I got you at last?" was her address on Catherine's entering the box and sitting by her. "Now, Mr. Morland," for he was close to her on the other side, "I shall not speak another word to you all the rest of the evening, so I charge you not to expect it. My sweetest Catherine, how have you been this long age? But I need not ask you, for you look delightfully. You really have done your hair in a more heavenly style than ever. You mischievous creature, do you want to attract everybody? I assure you my brother is quite in love with you already, and as for Mr. Tilney, but that is a settled thing. Even your modesty cannot doubt his attachment now. His coming back to Bath makes it too plain. Oh, what I would not give to see him! I really am quite wild with impatience. My mother says he is the most delightful young man in the world. She saw him this morning, you know. You must introduce him to me. Is he in the house now? Look about, for heaven's sake. I assure you I can hardly exist till I see him." "No," said Catherine, "he is not here. I cannot see him anywhere." "Oh, horrid! Am I never to be acquainted with him? How do you like my gown? I think it does not look amiss. The sleeves are entirely my own thought. Do you know I get so immoderately sick of Bath? Your brother and I were agreeing this morning that, though it is vastly well to be here for a few weeks, we would not live here for millions. We soon found out that our tastes were exactly alike in preferring the country to every other place. Really, our opinions were so exactly the same, it was quite ridiculous. There was not a single point in which we differed. I would not have had you by for the world. You were such a sly thing, I'm sure you would have made some droll remark or other about it." "No, indeed, I should not." "Oh, yes, you would indeed. I know you better than you know yourself. You would have told us that we seemed born for each other, or some nonsense of that kind, which would have distressed me beyond conception. My cheeks would have been as red as your roses. I would not have had you by me for the world." "Indeed, you do me an injustice. I would have not made such an improper remark upon any account. And besides, I'm sure it would have never entered my head." Isabella smiled incredulously and talked the rest of the evening to James. Catherine's resolution of endeavouring to meet Miss Tilney again continued in full force the next morning, and till the usual moment of going to the pump-room, she felt some alarm for the dread of a second prevention. But nothing of that kind occurred, no visitors appeared to delay them, and all three set off in good time for the pump-room, where the ordinary course of events and conversations took place. Mr. Allen, after drinking his glass of water, joined some gentlemen to talk over the politics of the day and compare the accounts of their newspapers, and the ladies walked about together, noticing every new face and almost every new bonnet in the room. The female part of the Thorpe party, attended by Mr. James Morland, appeared among the crowd in less than a quarter of an hour, and Catherine immediately took her usual place by the side of her friend. James, who was now in constant attendance, maintained a similar position, and separating themselves from the rest of their party, they walked in that manner for some time, till Catherine began to doubt the happiness of a situation which, confining her entirely to her friend and brother, gave her very little share in the notice of either. They were always engaged in some sentimental discussion or lively dispute, but their sentiments was conveyed in such whispering voices, and their vivacity attended with so much laughter, that though Catherine's supporting opinion was not unfrequently called for by one or the other, she was never able to give any, from not having heard a word of the subject. At length, however, she was empowered to disengage herself from her friend by the avowed necessity of speaking to Miss Tilney, who she most joyfully saw just entering the room with Mrs. Hughes, and whom she instantly joined, with a firmer determination to be acquainted than she might have had the courage to command had she not been urged by the disappointment of the day before. Miss Tilney met her with great civility, returned her advances with equal goodwill, and they continued talking together as long as both parties remained in the room. And though in all probability not an observation was made, not an expression used by either which had not been made and used some 1,000 times before under that roof in every Bath season, yet the merit of their being spoken with simplicity and truth and without personal conceit might be something uncommon. "How well your brother dances!" was an artless exclamation of Catherine's towards the close of their conversation, which at once surprised and amused her companion. "Henry?" she replied with a smile. "Yes, he does dance very well. He must have thought it very odd to hear me say I was engaged the other evening when he saw me sitting down, but I really had been engaged the whole day to Mr. Thorpe." Miss Tilney could only bow. "You cannot think," added Catherine after a moment's silence, "how surprised I was to see him again. I felt so sure of him being quite gone away. When Henry had the pleasure of seeing you before, he was in Bath but for a couple of days. He came only to engage lodging for us." "That never occurred to me, and of course, not seeing him anywhere, I thought he must be gone. Was not the young lady he danced with on Monday a Miss Smith?" "Yes, an acquaintance of Mrs. Hughes. I dare say she was very glad to dance. Do you think her pretty?" "Not very. He never comes to the pump room, I suppose?" "Yes, sometimes, but he is rid out this morning with my father." Mrs. Hughes now joins them, and asked Miss Tilney if she was ready to go. "I hope I shall have the pleasure of seeing you again soon," said Catherine. "Shall you be at the cotillion ball tomorrow?" "Perhaps we— Yes, I think we certainly shall. I am glad of it, for we shall all be there." This civility was duly returned, and they parted, on Miss Tilney's side with some knowledge of her new acquaintance's feelings, and on Catherine's without the smallest consciousness of having explained them. She went home very happy. The morning had answered all her hopes, and the evening of the following day was now the object of expectation. The future good. What gown and head-dress she should wear on the occasion became her chief concern. She cannot be justified in it. Dress is at all times a frivolous distinction, and excessive solicitude about it often destroys its own aim. Catherine knew all this very well. Her great-aunt had read her a lecture on the subject only the Christmas before, and yet she lay awake 10 minutes on Wednesday night, debating between her spotted and her tambored muslin, and nothing but the shortness of the time prevented her from buying a new one for the evening. This would have been an error in judgment, great though not uncommon, from which one of the other sex rather than her own, a brother rather than a great-aunt, might have warned her, for man only can be aware of the insensibility of man towards a new gown. It would be mortifying to the feelings of many ladies could they be made to understand how little the heart of man is affected by what is costly or new in their attire, how little it is biassed by the texture of their muslin, and how unsusceptible of peculiar tenderness towards the spotted, the sprigged, the mull, or the jaconet. Woman is fine for her own satisfaction alone. No man will admire her the more, no woman will like her the better for it. Neatness and fashion are enough for the former, and a something of shabbiness or impropriety will be most endearing to the latter. But not one of these grave reflections troubled the tranquillity of Catherine. She entered the rooms on Thursday evening with feelings very different from what had attended her thither the Monday before. She had then been exulting in her engagement to Thorpe, and was now cheerfully anxious to avoid his sight, lest he should engage her again, for though she could not, dared not expect that Mr. Tilney should ask her a third time to dance, her wishes, hopes, and plans all centred in nothing less. Every young lady may feel for my heroine in this critical moment, for every young lady has at some time or other known the same agitation. All have been, or at least all have believed themselves to be in danger from the pursuit of someone whom they wish to avoid, and all have been anxious for the attentions of someone who they wish to please. As soon as they were joined by the Thorpes, Catherine's agonies began. She fidgeted about if John Thorpe came towards her, hid herself as much as possible from his view, and when he spoke to her pretended not to hear him. The cotillions were over, the country dancing began, and she saw nothing of the Tilneys. "Do not be frightened, my dear Catherine," whispered Isabella, "but I'm really going to dance with your brother again. I declare positively it is quite shocking. I tell him he ought to be ashamed of himself, but you and John must keep us in countenance. Make haste, my dear creature, and come to us. John has just walked off, but he'll be back in a moment." Catherine had neither time nor inclination to answer. The others walked away. John Thorpe was still in view, and she gave herself up for lost. That she might not appear, however, to observe or expect him, she kept her eyes intently fixed on her fan, and a self-condemnation for her folly in supposing that among such a crowd they should ever meet with the Tilneys in any reasonable time had just passed through her mind, when she suddenly found herself addressed and again solicited to dance by Mr. Tilney himself. With what sparkling eyes and ready motion she granted his request, and with how pleasing a flutter of heart she went with him to the set, may be easily imagined. To escape, and as she believed, so narrowly escape John Thorpe, and to be asked so immediately on his joining her, asked by Mr. Tilney, as if he had sought her on purpose, it did not appear to her that life could supply any greater felicity. Scarcely had they worked themselves into the quiet possession of a place, however, when her attention was claimed by John Thorpe, who stood behind her. "Heyday, Miss Morland," said he. "What's the meaning of this? I thought you and I were to dance together." "I wonder you should think so, for you never asked me." "That is a good one, by Jove! I asked you as soon as I came into the room, and I was just going to ask you again. But when I turned round, you were gone. This is a cursed shabby trick. I only came for the sake of dancing with you, and I firmly believe you were engaged to me ever since Monday. Yes, I remember. I asked you while we were waiting in the lobby for your cloak. And here I've been telling all my acquaintance that I was going to dance with the prettiest girl in the room, and when they see you standing up with someone else, they will quiz me famously. Oh, no, they will never think of me after such a description as that. By heavens, if they do not, I will kick them out of the room for blockheads. What chap have you there?" Catherine satisfied his curiosity. "Tilney," he repeated. "I do not know him. A good figure of a man, well put together. Does he want a horse?" "Here is a friend of mine, Sam Fletcher. He's got one to sell that would suit anybody. A famous clever animal for the road, only 40 guineas. I had 50 minds to buy him myself, for it is one of my maxims, always buy a good horse when I meet with one. But it would not answer my purpose. It would not do for the field. I would give any money for a real good hunter. I have 3 now, the best that ever were backed. I would not take 800 guineas for them. Fletcher and I mean to get a house in Leicestershire against the next season. It's so damned uncomfortable living at an inn." This was the last sentence by which he could weary Catherine's attention, for he was just then borne off by the resistless pressure of a long string of passing ladies. Her partner now drew near, and said, "That gentleman would have put me out of patience had he stayed with you half a minute longer. He has no business to withdraw the attention of my partner from me. We have entered into a contract of mutual agreeableness for the space of an evening, and all our agreeableness belongs solely to each other for that time. Nobody can fasten themselves on to the notice of one without injuring the rights of the other. I consider a country dance as an emblem of marriage. Fidelity and complaisance are the principal duties of both. Those men who do not choose to dance or marry themselves have no business with the partners or wives of their neighbours." "But they are such very different things, that you think they cannot be compared together?" "To be sure not. People that marry can never part, but must go and keep house together. People that dance only stand opposite to each other in a long room for half an hour. And such is your definition of matrimony and dancing. Taken in that light, certainly their resemblance is not striking, but I think I should place them in such a view. You will allow that in both man has the advantage of choice, woman only the power of refusal, that in both it's an engagement between a man and a woman, formed for the advantage of each, and that when once entered into, they belong exclusively to each other until the moment of its dissolution. That it is their duty, each to endeavour to give no cause for wishing that he or she had bestowed themselves elsewhere, and their best interest to keep their own imaginations from wandering towards the perfections of other neighbours, or fancying that they should have been better off with anyone else. You will allow all this?" "Yes, to be sure, as you state it, all this sounds very well, but still they are so very different. I cannot look upon them at all in the same light, nor think the same duties belong to them. In one respect there is certainly a difference. In marriage the man is supposed to provide for the support of the woman to make the home agreeable to the man. He is to purvey and she is to smile. But in dancing their duties are exactly changed. The agreeableness and compliance are expected from him, while she furnishes the fan and the lavender water. That, I suppose, was the difference of duties which struck you as rendering the conditions incapable of comparison?" "No, indeed, I had never thought of that." "Then I am quite at a loss. One thing, however, I must observe. This disposition on your side is rather alarming. You totally disallow any similarity in the obligations. And may I not thence infer your notions of the duties of the dancing state are not so strict as your partner might wish? Have I not reason to fear that if the gentleman who spoke to you just now were to return, or if any gentleman were to address you, there would be nothing to restrain you from conversing with him as long as you choose? Mr. Thorpe is such a very particular friend of my brother's that if he talks to me I must talk to him again. But there are hardly 3 young men in the room besides him that I have any acquaintance with. And that is to be my only security. Alas, alas! Nay, I'm sure that you cannot have better, for if I do not know anybody, it is impossible for me to talk to them, and besides, I do not want to talk to anybody. Now you have given me security worth having, and I shall proceed with courage. Do you find Bath as agreeable as when I had the honour of making the inquiry before? Yes, quite. More so, indeed. More so? Take care, or you'll forget to be tired of it at the proper time. You ought to be tired of it at the end of 6 weeks. I do not think I should be tired if I was to stay here 6 months. Bath, compared with London, has little variety, and so everybody finds out every year. For 6 weeks I allow Bath is pleasant enough, but beyond that it is the most tiresome place in the world. You would be told so by people of all descriptions who come regularly every winter, lengthen their 6 weeks into 10 or 12, and go away at last because they can afford to stay no longer. Well, other people must judge for themselves, and those who go to London may think nothing of Bath. But I, who live in a small retired village in the country, can never find greater sameness in such a place as this than in my own home. For here are a variety of amusements, a variety of things to be seen and done all day long, which I can know nothing of there. You are not fond of the country? Yes, I am. I've always lived there and always been very happy, but certainly there's more of a sameness in a country life than in a Bath life. One day in the country is exactly like another. But then you spend your time so much more rationally in the country. Do I? Do you not? I do not believe there is much difference. Here you are in pursuit only of amusement all day long. And so I am at home, only I do not find so much of it. I walk about here, and so I do there. But here I see a variety of people in every street, and there I can only go and call on Mrs. Allen. Mr. Tilney was very much amused. Only go and call on Mrs. Allen, he repeated. What a picture of intellectual poverty. However, when you sink into this abyss again, you will have more to say. You will be able to talk of Bath and all that you did here. Oh, yes, I shall never be in want of something to talk of again to Mrs. Allen or anybody else. I really believe I shall always be talking of Bath when I am home again. I do like it so very much. If I could have but papa and mamma and the rest of them here, I suppose I should be too happy. James is coming, my eldest brother, is quite delightful, and especially as it turns out that the very family we had just got so intimate with are his intimate friends already. Oh, whoever can be tired of Bath? Not those who bring such fresh feelings of every sort to it as you do. But papas and mammas and brothers and intimate friends are a good deal gone by to most of the frequenters of Bath, and the honest relish of balls and plays and everyday sights is past with them. Here their conversation closed, the demands of the dance becoming now too importunate for a divided attention. Soon after their reaching the bottom of the set, Catherine perceived herself to be earnestly regarded by a gentleman who stood among the lookers-on, immediately behind her partner. He was a very handsome man, of a commanding aspect, past the bloom but not past the vigour of life, and with his eye still directed towards her, she saw him presently addressed by Mr. Tilney in a familiar whisper. Confused by this notice, but blushing from the fear of its being excited by something wrong in her appearance, she turned away her head. But while she did so, the gentleman retreated, and her partner, coming nearer, said, "I see that you guess what I have just been asked. That gentleman knows your name, and you have a right to know his. It is General Tilney, my father." Catherine's answer was only, "Oh," but it was an "oh" expressing everything needful, attention to his words, and perfect reliance on their truth. With a real interest and a strong admiration did her eye now follow the General as he moved through the crowd, and "how handsome a family they are," was her secret remark. In chatting with Miss Tilney before the evening concluded, a new source of felicity arose to her. She had never taken a country walk since her arrival in Bath. Miss Tilney, to whom all the commonly frequented environs were familiar, spoke of them in terms which made her all eagerness to know them too, and on her openly fearing that she might find nobody to go with her, it was proposed by the brother and sister that they should join her in a walk some morning or other. "I shall like it," she cried, "beyond anything in the world, and do not let us put it off. Let us go tomorrow." This was readily agreed to, with only a proviso of Miss Tilney's that it did not rain, which Catherine was sure it would not. At 12 o'clock they were to call for her in Pulteney Street, and remember, 12 o'clock was her parting speech to her new friend. Of her other, her older, more established friend, Isabella, of whose fidelity and worth she had enjoyed a fortnight's experience, she scarcely saw anything during the evening. Yet, though longing to make her acquainted with her happiness, she cheerfully submitted to the wish of Mr. Allen, which took them rather early away, and her spirits danced within her as she danced in her chair all the way home. Chapter 11. The morrow brought a very sober-looking morning, the sun making only a few efforts to appear, and Catherine augured from it everything most favourable to her wishes. A bright morning so early in the year, she allowed, would generally turn to rain, but a cloudy one foretold improvement as the day advanced. She applied to Mr. Allen for confirmation of her hopes, but Mr. Allen, not having his own skies and barometers about him, declined giving any absolute promise of sunshine. She applied to Mrs. Allen, and Mrs. Allen's opinion was more positive. She had no doubt in the world of it being a very fine day, if the clouds would only go off and the sun keep out. At about 11 o'clock, however, a few specks of small rain upon the windows caught Catherine's watchful eye, and, "Oh dear, I do believe it will be wet," broke from her in a most desponding tone. "I thought how it would be," said Mrs. Allen. "No walk for me to-day," sighed Catherine, "but perhaps it may come to nothing, or it may hold up before 12. "Perhaps it may, but then, my dear, it will be so dirty." "Oh, that will not signify. I never mind dirt." "No," replied her friend very placidly, "I know you never mind dirt." After a short pause, "It comes on faster and faster," said Catherine, as she stood watching at the window. "So it does indeed. If it keeps raining, the streets will be very wet. There are 4 umbrellas up already. How I hate the sight of an umbrella. They are disagreeable things to carry. I would much rather take a chair at any time. It was such a nice-looking morning. I felt so convinced it would be dry. Anybody would have thought so, indeed. There will be very few people in the pump-room if it rains all the morning. I hope Mr. Allen will put on his greatcoat when he goes, but I dare say he will not, for he had rather do anything in the world than walk out in a greatcoat. I wonder he should dislike it. It must be so comfortable." The rain continued, fast though not heavy. Catherine went every 5 minutes to the clock, threatening on each return that if it still kept raining another 5 minutes, she would give up the matter as hopeless. The clock struck 12, and still it rained. "You will not be able to go, my dear." "I do not quite despair yet. I shall not give up till 12:15. This is just the time of day for it to clear up, and I do think it looks a little lighter. There, it is 20 minutes after 12, and now I shall give it up entirely. Oh, that we had such weather here as they had at Udolpho, or at least in Tuscany in the south of France, the night that poor St. Alban died. Such beautiful weather." At 12:30, when Catherine's anxious attention to the weather was over, and she could no longer claim any merit from its amendment, the sky began voluntarily to clear. A gleam of sunshine took her quite by surprise. She looked round, the clouds were parting, and she instantly returned to the window to watch over and encourage the happy appearance. 10 minutes more made it certain that a bright afternoon would succeed, and justified the opinion of Mrs. Allen, who had always thought it would clear up. But whether Catherine might still expect her friends, whether there had not been too much rain for Miss Tilney to venture, must yet be the question. It was too dirty for Mrs. Allen to accompany her husband to the pump-room. He accordingly set off by himself, and Catherine had barely watched him down the street when her notice was claimed by the approach of the same 2 open carriages containing the same 3 people that had surprised her so much a few mornings back. "Isabella, my brother, and Mr. Thorpe, I declare. They're coming for me, perhaps, but I shall not go. I cannot go indeed, for you know Miss Tilney may still call." Mrs. Allen agreed to it. John Thorpe was soon with them, and his voice was with them yet sooner, for on the stairs he was calling out to Miss Morland to be quick. Make haste, make haste, as he threw open the door. Put on your hat this moment. There's no time to be lost. We're going to Bristol. How do you do, Mrs. Allen? To Bristol? Is that not a great way off? But however, I cannot go with you today because I'm engaged. I expect some friends every moment. This was, of course, vehemently talked down as no reason at all. Mrs. Allen was called on to second him, and the two others walked in to give their assistance. My sweetest Catherine, is this not delightful? We shall have the most heavenly drive. You are to thank your brother and me for the scheme. It darted into our heads at breakfast time, I verily believe at the same instant, and we should have been off 2 hours ago if it had not been for this detestable rain. But it does not signify. The nights are moonlight, and we shall do delightfully. Oh, I am in such ecstasies at the thought of a little country air and quiet. So much better than going to the lower rooms. We shall drive directly to Clifton and dine there, and as soon as dinner is over, if there's time for it, go on to King's Weston. I doubt our being able to do so much, said Morland. You croaking fellow, cried Thorpe. We shall be able to do 10 times more. King's Weston, I, and Blaise Castle too, and anything else we hear of. But here is your sister says she will not go. Blaise Castle, said Catherine. What is that? The finest place in England, worth going 50 miles at any time to see. What, is it really a castle? An old castle? The oldest in the kingdom? But is it like what one reads of? Exactly, the very same. But now really, are there towers and long galleries? By dozens. Then I should like to see it, but I cannot go. Not go, my beloved creature, what do you mean? I cannot go, because, looking down as she spoke, fearful of Isabella's smile, I expect Miss Tilney and her brother to call on me to take a country walk. They promised to come at 12, only it rained, but now as it is so fine, I dare say they will be here soon. Not they, indeed, cried Thorpe, for as we turned into Broad Street I saw them. Does he not drive a phaeton with bright chestnuts? I do not know, indeed. Yes, I know he does. I saw him. You're talking of the man you danced with last night, are you not? Yes. Well, I saw him at that moment turn up Lansdowne Road, driving a smart-looking girl. Did you indeed? Did, upon my soul. Knew him again directly, and he seemed to have got some very pretty cattle too. It's very odd, but I suppose they thought it would be too dirty for a walk. And well they might, for I never saw so much dirt in my life. Walk? You could no more walk than you could fly. It has not been so dirty the whole winter. It's ankle-deep everywhere. Isabella corroborated it. My dearest Catherine, you cannot form an idea of the dirt. Come, you must go. You cannot refuse going now. I should like to go and see the castle, but may we go all over it? May we go up every staircase and into every suite of rooms? Yes, every hole and corner. But then if they should only be gone for an hour till it's drier and cool by and by. Make yourself easy. There's no danger of that, for I heard Tilney hallooing to a man who was just passing by on horseback that they were going as far as Wick Rocks. Then I will. Shall I go, Mrs. Allen? Just as you please, my dear. Mrs. Allen, you must persuade her to go, was the general cry. Mrs. Allen was not inattentive to it. Well, my dear, said she, suppose you go. And in 2 minutes they were off. Catherine's feelings, as she got into the carriage, were in a very unsettled state, divided between regret for the loss of one great pleasure and in the hope of soon enjoying another, almost its equal in degree, however unlike in kind. She could not think the Tilneys had acted quite well by her in so readily giving up their engagement without sending her any message of excuse. It was now but an hour later than the time fixed on for the beginning of their walk, and in spite of what she had heard of the prodigious accumulation of dirt in the course of that hour, she could not, from her own observations, help thinking that they might have gone on with very little inconvenience. To feel herself slighted by them was very painful. On the other hand, the delight of exploring an edifice like Udolpho, as her fancy represented Blaise Castle to be, was such a counterpoise of good as might console her for almost anything. They passed briskly down Pulteney Street and through Laura Place without the exchange of many words. Thorpe talked to his horse, and she meditated by turns on broken promises and broken arches, phaetons and false hangings, Tilneys and trapdoors. As they entered Argyle Buildings, however, she was roused by this address from her companion. "Who is that girl who looked upon you so hard as we went by?" "Who? Where?" "On the right-hand pavement. She must be almost out of sight now." Catherine looked round and saw Miss Tilney leaning on her brother's arm, walking slowly down the street. She saw them both looking back at her. "Stop, stop, Mr. Thorpe!" she impatiently cried. "It is Miss Tilney, it is indeed. How could you tell me they were gone? Stop, stop, I will get out this minute and go to them." But to what purpose did she speak? Thorpe only lashed his horse into a brisker trot. The Tilneys, who had soon ceased to look after her, were in a moment out of sight round the corner of Laura Place, and in another moment she was herself whisked into Market Place. Still, however, and during the length of another street, she entreated him to stop. "Pray, pray stop, Mr. Thorpe. I cannot go on. I will not go on. I must go back to Miss Tilney." But Mr. Thorpe only laughed, smacked his whip, encouraged his horse, made odd noises, and drove on. And Catherine, angry and vexed as she was, having no power of getting away, was obliged to give up the point and submit. Her reproaches, however, were not spared. "How could you deceive me so, Mr. Thorpe? How could you say that you saw them driving up the Lansdowne Road? I would not have had it happen for the world. They must think it so strange, so rude of me to go by them too without saying a word. You do not know how vexed I am. I shall have no pleasure at Clifton, nor in anything else. I had rather, 10 times rather, get out now and walk back to them. How could you say you saw them driving out in a phaeton?" Thorpe defended himself very stoutly, declared he'd never seen two men so alike in his life, and would hardly give up the point of its having been Tilney himself. Their drive, even when this subject was over, was not likely to be very agreeable. Catherine's complacence was no longer what it had been in their former airing. She listened reluctantly, and her replies were short. Blaise Castle remained her only comfort. Towards that she still looked at intervals with pleasure, though rather than be disappointed of the promised walk, and especially rather than be thought ill by the Tilneys, she would willingly have given up all the happiness which his walls could supply, the happiness of a progress through a lofty suite of rooms, exhibiting the remains of magnificent furniture, though now for many years deserted, the happiness of being stopped in their way along narrow winding vaults by a low grated door, or even having their lamp, their only lamp, extinguished by a sudden gust of wind, of being left in total darkness. In the meanwhile, they proceeded on their journey without any mischance, and were within view of the town of Keeshan, when a halloo from Morland, who was behind them, made his friend pull up, to know what was the matter. The others then came close enough for conversation, and Morland said, "We'd better go back, Thorpe. It's too late now to go on today. Your sister thinks so, well as I. We've been exactly an hour coming from Pulteney Street, very little more than 7 miles, and I suppose we have at least 8 more to go. It will never do. We set out a great deal too late. We'd much better put it off till another day and turn round." "It's all one to me," replied Thorpe rather angrily, and instantly turning his horse, they were on their way back to Bath. "If your brother had not got such a damned beast to drive," said he soon afterwards, "we might have done it very well. My horse would have trotted to Clifton within the hour if left to himself, and I have almost broken my arm pulling him into the cursed broken-winded jade's pace. Morland's a fool for not keeping a horse and gig of his own." "No, he's not," said Catherine warmly, "for I'm sure he could not afford it."
"And why cannot he afford it?"
"Because he has not money enough."
"And whose fault is that?"
"Nobody's that I know of." Thorpe then said something in the loud, incoherent way to which he had often recourse, about its being a damned thing to be miserly, and that if people who rolled in money could not afford things, he did not know who could, which Catherine did not even endeavour to understand. Disappointed of what was to have been the consolation of her first disappointment, she was less and less disposed either to be agreeable herself or to find her companion so, and they returned to Pulteney Street without her speaking 20 words. As she entered the house, the footman told her that a gentleman and lady had called and inquired for her a few minutes after her setting off. That when he told them that she had gone out with Mr. Thorpe, the lady had asked whether any message had been left for her, and on his saying no, had felt for a card, but said she had none about her, and went away. Pondering over these heart-rending tidings, Catherine walked slowly upstairs. At the head of them she was met by Mr. Allen, who, on hearing the reason for their speedy return, said, "I'm glad your brother had so much sense. I'm glad you're come back. It was a strange, wild scheme." They all spent the evening together at Thorpe's. Catherine was disturbed and out of spirits, but Isabella seemed to find a pool of commerce in the fate of which she shared by private partnership with Morland, a very good equivalent for the quiet and country air of an inn at Clifton. Her satisfaction, too, at not being at the lower rooms was spoken more than once. "How I pity the poor creatures that are going there! How glad I am that I'm not amongst them! I wonder whether it will be a full ball or not. They have not begun dancing yet. I would not be there for all the world. It is so delightful to have an evening now and then to oneself. I dare say it will not be a good ball. I know the Mitchells will not be there. I'm sure I pity everyone that is. But I dare say, Mr. Morland, you long to be at it, do you not? I'm sure you do. Well, pray, do not let anybody here be a restraint on you. I dare say we could very well do without you. But you men think yourselves of such consequence." Catherine could almost have accused Isabella of being wanting in tenderness towards herself and her sorrows, so very little did they appear to dwell on her mind. So inadequate was the comfort she offered. "Do not be so dull, my dearest creature," she whispered. "You would quite break my heart. It was amazingly shocking, to be sure, but the Tilneys were entirely to blame. Why were they not more punctual? It was dirty indeed, but what did that signify? I'm sure John and I should not have minded it. I never mind going through anything where a friend is concerned. That is my disposition, and John is just the same. He has an amazingly strong feelings. Good heaven, what a delightful hand you've got! Kings, I vow, I was never so happy in my life. I would 50 times rather you should have them than myself." And now I may dismiss my heroine to the sleepless couch, which is the true heroine's portion, to a pillow strewed with thorns and wet with tears. And lucky she may think herself if she get another good night's rest in the course of the next 3 months.
All righty then. So, poor Catherine got played like a cheap violin. That was sad. That was sad. It was frustrating. Blah. Let's go back to when things were fun at the beginning of chapter 10, when she gets to dance with Tilney. And they have that goofy conversation about dancing as a social contract, as a marriage contract. Now, Tilney starts to kind of paraphrase and play with the marriage ceremony from the Book of Common Prayer. Catherine is actually more right than she knows. Or maybe she knows exactly how right she is. Divorce was pretty much impossible at this time. We know this from Jane Eyre, that divorce was simply not done. Not certainly from the woman's point of view. You were stuck. However, with a dance partner, it's pretty easy to switch after half an hour, after you've done your 2 sets, after you've danced your dances. You can rotate out to someone else, unless you have largely promised yourself to someone in advance of the dance. Like, tonight I will go and you will be my partner the whole night. That'd be a different situation. So you got to see Blaise Castle, or you didn't get to see Blaise Castle, but you got to see how they talked about Blaise Castle to Catherine, knowing full well that any chance to see an actual Gothic castle was going to be a huge draw for her, and probably not something that she could easily give up an opportunity to go to. So that was not very nice. But then Jane Austen does some beautiful writing where, as she's kind of daydreaming about what she's about to see, and probably wishing that she was with the Tilneys instead doing this, she's meditating, it says, by turns on broken promises and broken arches. So the Tilneys were supposed to come and didn't, and broken arches would be the Gothic arches she imagines she's going to see at this castle. Phaetons and false hangings. Phaetons, the carriage that Thorpe claimed to have seen Tilney driving, and false hangings, the kinds of things that you get at the Gothic castle. Of Tilneys, that's a giveaway, and trapdoors, the other thing that one might expect to see at a Gothic castle. It's just a lovely piece of writing, and it's a beautiful alliterative pairings, I think. I like that kind of writing, so I just thought that was clever. There's also something else that Austen is doing. You know how she is constantly putting Catherine in a position during this entire story where she is thrust into situations where were she a Gothic heroine, this is what would be happening to her. But instead, it's this mundane thing. One of the editors said, Catherine has to live through a mundane kidnapping by a mundane villain, and that would be Thorpe. So she is, in fact, kidnapped here. She is taken against her will out of town because it wasn't against her will to go to the castle. It was that had she actually known the circumstances, the true circumstances of the situation, she would never have broken her agreement with the Tilneys. And she would have waited for them and gone to see Blaise Castle perhaps on another day when they could have actually gotten there. Thorpe also says something very, very important to us to have heard at this point. Now, as you might imagine, it would be very expensive to own your own carriage and horses, especially if you were owning them here in Bath. Not your home, but your home away from home, because you would have to pay for a place to store the carriage, a place to store the horses, the people who need to take care of the horses, all of the accoutrements that go along with having the horses in the carriage, and, feeding the animal. I mean, it's just a lot of money. So when Thorpe makes the comment that they would have, and he's of course wrong, that they would have been able to get to Blaise Castle had only her brother not hired a horse and carriage, meaning the horse was not in good enough shape to have gone at the speed that his fine steed could go at. Also untrue. Catherine said, no, it's not that weird that he doesn't have a horse. He couldn't afford it. And Thorpe's response is, and why cannot he afford it? She says, because he has not money enough. Thorpe's response is, and whose fault is that? Which is an interesting thing to come back with, and a particularly petulant thing to come back with, too. And Catherine is too polite, just too polite, to understand where Thorpe's going with this. It's nobody's fault that I know of. And then he said something about its being, and it's another D underline, so it's a damn thing to be miserly, and that if people who rolled in money could not afford things, he didn't know who could, which Catherine couldn't even endeavor to understand. Well, no, of course she couldn't endeavor to understand it because she knows that their family doesn't have money, not money to spend or roll in. Thorpe clearly doesn't know that. It's as though many assumptions have been made, both about Catherine and her brother and their family's fiscal situation. So important to file away for future reference. And those are our chapters for today. It may make you wonder, Heather, why did you call this episode Nothing Special? And I will tell you. During our year of pandemic, my younger son, the one who will be going to Ireland with us, he has taught himself guitar and to a certain extent piano and more or less audio mixing. And he has started writing, performing, and producing songs, his own songs. And I am linking out to 2 different places where you can find his songs. And we are going to play you out on one of them. He is all over the place with the style of music that he is attracted to playing, which I think is marvelous because he's not stuck in a rut. But he and his brother have come a long way since they were Doofus Del Fuego and Blockhead. Yeah, and I'm not going to say anything else. I am just hugely proud of my kid for being able to do what he's done. And the name of the song that we're going to play you out on is Nothing Special. Take care of yourself. Have a great one. Be well, wear a mask, take care of each other, and I'll talk to you next week. Here's Aiden. Bye.
Stuck together, rain and sunny weather, playing in prisons, posters, sofa leather. And the love you gave your teeth, I saw your heart break underneath. Every day a struggle, every night was trouble. Broke my castles just to give me rubble. I never wondered why I'd leave your face empty inside. Nothing, 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 I can see it all meant nothing but pain. Happiness wasn't an option. It may be for the better, 'cause all your stormy weather was just dead weight. And now I see your misery was really nothing special. Nothing special. Your heart still beats, and your lungs still breathe, but babe, it's nothing special. Nothing special. So for now, eyes inside swipes, both like eyes that made me hide. I left the bombs beneath my bed. I just packed my bags instead. This happy sorrow spoke to me with your wistful eyes, and you watched the things. Oh, we were never gonna make it. We were always gonna break. Nothing, nothing, nothing. All you ever gave was friction. Your trust to break, even that was fiction. In love we played with shadows, and even that was shallow. Too much too late. Yeah, now I see your misery was really nothing special. Your heart still beats, your lungs still breathe, but there's just nothing special. I analyzed you, memorized the demons in your head. I should've known my love was used and wasted. Summer turned to